Welcome to the Clear Brand Academy podcast, where we take the mystery out of marketing and help you get more leads and sales with a clear brand and proven marketing tactics. I'm your host, Alexander Toth. Today we're talking about webinars. Webinars are a great way to get both leads and sales for your company, but they can feel like there's a big roadblock to getting started. Now, this is one of the things that makes them great. The harder it is to do something, the less people do it. So if you look at how many blogs are out there, there's far more blogs than there are podcasts. And webinars are like that. Because there's a bit of a barrier to entry, there are less people doing them, which means they still hold a whole lot of value. So if you are interested and willing and able to do a webinar, they are a great way to get leads and sales for your company. Today, I'm going to be talking about how exactly you can go about a webinar. What do you talk about? What equipment are you going to need? What about an outline for a script? And on and on. I've got 10 points here, 10 ways that you can run an incredible webinar to get more leads and sales for your company. Now, there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump straight in. The first big question we got to ask is, what is it? What is a webinar? What is the point? What are we going to be doing in this hour or longer time together? So, as with basically all content that we talk about at ClearBrand, whether it's a blog or a podcast, whatever it is, a lead magnet, the primary goal is going to be to provide value. If your webinar is not outrageously valuable, you're not going to see the results that you're after. You're not going to build momentum and get more and more leads over time. You're also not going to see potential sales through the webinar. So first and foremost, we got to provide value. I like to think about it this way, and this is how I approach this podcast as well. If a person is going to sit down and spend an hour listening to me talk or interview someone, or in a webinar, we'd say present. But if a person's going to spend an hour doing that thing, I want it to be worth more than an hour of their time. So think about how much you're worth, how much an hour of your time is worth. So a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs or business leaders, okay? So I would say they're making in the realm of $100,000 to $200,000, depending on the role at the company, maybe even more than that. So just to make this even more valuable, let's assume we're at the $200,000 range, okay? So that's about $100 an hour. It's an estimate. So that tells me every single podcast episode should be worth about $100. That's how I figure out if we should do a podcast or not. That's also how I'm going to approach a webinar. How can we provide something that is so valuable we could charge $100 for it? If we could charge $100, I know we're heading in the right direction. So that's a good way of rule of thumb for how much value are you providing. Now, the other part of the webinar, what is a webinar, is that you're going to be selling. Typically, you're going to be selling in the webinar. It is not only to provide value. If you're going to spend an hour to an hour and a half with somebody in a webinar, you're able to take them on this journey toward buying from you, right? The whole customer journey that normally takes a long time for somebody to discover you and then get to know your company and then decide if they want to work with you, you're doing that whole thing in the span of one webinar. So normally at the end, we're going to have a sale. There's going to be a sale of some kind, of call to action, buy this, join this, something like that. Now, because that's part of it, a lot of folks approach the webinar as if that's the only thing. And I would absolutely disagree with that. I do not want us to get confused. If it's content, our first job is to provide value, overwhelming value. And then that builds enough trust that people might buy from us. So first value and then sales. So that's basically what a webinar is. And the definition of what it is that I kind of skip, but I'll just throw in here in case you don't know. A webinar is typically going to be a presentation online. That's basically what a webinar is, right? So if we're going to do it, I'll talk about equipment and tools and things here in a second. But basically, a person signs up online. That's why it's a good lead generator, is they're going to give you their email address in order to get access to the webinar. And then they're going to show up, and it's a video presentation, and it's interactive. So there's a chat normally as well. And then all of that combines, and that's what we're going to be calling a webinar. So an email sign up, video presentation with a live chat. So how are we going to go about doing a webinar? What is the how here? We've got the what. Now next we have the how here. So one of the huge benefits of a webinar that sets it apart from other methods of communication. Number one, it's online. So anybody can engage. So rather than like going to a seminar, which is kind of similar, right? We could call a seminar a live webinar, or a webinar a virtual seminar, right? They're very similar in a lot of ways. Webinars might be a little shorter, but they're online. So you have tons of folks who might be able to join. They don't need to be in your area. They don't need to schedule time to drive and find parking and all of that, right? The webinar is online. It's easy. The other thing that you can do with the webinar that you can't do as much in a seminar is you can read from a script the whole time. Because this is online and you've got your computer screen pulled up and no one else knows what's on your computer screen, you are able to perfect a script and then read from it in your webinar. In fact, I highly recommend this. I'm going to give you an outline in a minute for your script. So normally what I do when I'm running a webinar is I'll have my camera on at the beginning and I'll say, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. We'll engage for a minute in some kind of rapport building or chat. Hey, maybe post where you're from, something like that. And then I just say, hey, I'm incredibly distractible. So I'm going to turn off my camera so that I can focus in and make sure that I'm serving you well. And then I read from a script. And the script pairs with a PowerPoint or a keynote presentation. So I'll be sharing my screen. I'll have the PowerPoint or the keynote pulled up. So that's what people are looking at. Instead of looking at me, they're looking at the PowerPoint. Now, if you don't like scripts, you might feel a little uncomfortable with this idea. How are we going to be providing value if we're just reading from a script? I want to flip that on its head. How would you provide value if you're making it up on the spot? You see, what a script does is it allows you to perfect the delivery. And each time you do the webinar, which ideally you're doing a webinar kind of repeatedly. You could have it on a weekly schedule or a quarterly or a annual. But this is a huge benefit of a webinar, and a reason to do it more than once is you can perfect it over time. And then you're just nailing it. You're reading the script. That also means that you can pass it off to someone else. So if you go on vacation and somebody else needs to do it, great, they can read from that same script. So it's very scalable, it's repeatable, it doesn't have to be done by you. All great reasons for this. So write the script, refine the script, look at where people are engaging and where they're not, and make sure that you're improving your script over time. Now that's going to go with your presentation so that because people are watching the presentation rather than you, it's got to be good. It's got to have the right stuff on it. So you'd look at normal PowerPoint recommendations for this. You don't want to be reading exactly what's on the screen. You want what's on the screen to be highlighting and emphasizing certain things that you're saying. Whether that's with an image, a lot of folks are throwing GIFs or GIFs. It's the correct term is GIF, but nobody says that. So they're putting GIFs into webinars or little short clips of things. All fun, right? Increases that engagement. So let's talk about an outline here. An outline for your webinar. This is a brief outline. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about this. This is just one that we have used at ClearBrand, and I liked the results. We've used this multiple times, and I really do like this basic outline. So we're going to have this on the show notes page. If you click the link below the podcast, if you're listening, or below the video if you're watching, it'll take you back to our website, and it'll have this outline there on the page for you. So 0 to 6 minutes in, we kind of do an intro and the problem, right? This is going to follow the story formula. So we're typically going to want to start with their motivation and their problem. What is motivating them? Why are they here? What do they want to discover? That's going to be part of the 6 minutes. And then what's the problem that's getting in their way? That's part of the intro 6 minutes. So the motivation and the problem. Minutes 6 through 14 are going to be basically your story. So as far as the story formula goes, we could call this the guide section. It's how you've encountered the same problem. It's going to be how you tried to fix it. And then, it didn't work. And what you're doing with that is you are basically highlighting the ways that your listeners have tried to fix it and it didn't work. And by telling it as your story, which I don't want you to lie, so use things that are true, but by telling it as your story, you're creating a great deal of empathy. And they're saying, they understand me. So you do want to pick pieces of your story. You're not going to tell your entire life story here, right? So we're going to pick pieces of your story that connect with the viewers. So that's minutes 6 through 14. It's basically your story. But remember, it didn't work. Whatever you tried, it didn't work. At 14 minutes in, 14 to 16 minutes, we're going to have the breakthrough. And this is where you're going to share, here's what I discovered. This is the breakthrough that I had. This is the secret, right? Or whatever it is. I'm not a huge fan of secrets. I had somebody describe me as kind of the almost like the anti-Russell Brunson. I kind of like that because I'm more about the working hard and experiencing growth over time rather than making $1 million in 30 days or something. So anyway, I personally don't like secrets, but I do like breakthroughs. All right, at 16 minutes in, we're going to get into the main teaching. And this is where you're going to really expound on the breakthrough. But keep in mind, at the end of this, you're going to sell something. So the main teaching should also basically be leading up to what are you selling. These are the things that you need to do. Now, these things are hard, right? And so somebody hears this and they can do it, but you're going to sell them something that makes it easier. That's the idea here. So minutes 16 to 35. And these are all estimates, right, about this. That's your main teaching. You could do typically three things work great. So we've done a webinar where we did 3 ways to fix your website, and that was the main teaching. We've got a webinar right now, how to scale your marketing agency fast. We've got a marketing coaching and systems program where we're teaching other marketing agencies how to do better, how to help their clients better, how to grow better. And in the webinar for how to scale your agency fast, our teaching is 3 quick wins for your agency. 3 things that you can go do today that are immediately going to increase your profits and help you scale faster, right? That's valuable stuff. So when we talk about, we want this to be at least $100, that's it. It's in this main teaching. That's where that $100 of value comes in. Okay, so minutes 35 until 38 or so, that's the recap. Here's what you've learned. Here's what you've discovered so far. You're about to discover some more, but here's what you've discovered so far. Then we ask, how are you going to go about this? And this is the transition into the offer. How are you going to go about this? Well, the hard way is doing it all on your own. And there's an easy way, and that's what I'm about to show you, right? That's the idea for that. Then we have the offer. So the offer is about 38 to 48 minutes. Not length, but 38 minutes into the webinar through 48 minutes. So it's going to be about 10 minutes long is the offer, where you're describing, here's what you get. Here's the name of the thing. Here's what's included. Now, if it's not 10 minutes long, that's totally fine. Whatever length you need to describe what it is that you're selling. And it's going to be, like I said, related to solving that problem at the beginning. It's related to the teaching. So everything's been moving towards this offer. So you're going to describe the offer, 5 to 10 minutes long. Then you're going to talk about pricing. So we got to justify the value first. Typically, this is with price anchoring. So, other people charge this much, but you're not going to pay that much today, right? Or you could say something like, we've had this evaluated to see how much it would cost, and our lawyers said we should charge this much. All right, so we want to price anchor high, and then we're going to say, but we're only going to charge you this much, right? So there's the pricing. So pricing, this is the thing that really matters. Pricing should not occur prior to 38 minutes into the webinar. Now, this is from research done based on high-performing salespeople rather than webinars, but I still think it applies here. So what the research on high-performing salespeople shows is that those who reveal pricing after 38 minutes close more. So in this, we actually didn't get to the offer itself until 38 minutes. So as long as you followed this, you're good, right? But if you write something that's a little bit shorter, we do want to make sure that pricing is at least 38 minutes in. It could be a little bit later. So we do pricing about 48 to 55 minutes. So what's going to happen is we're going to reveal the price. We're going to have some kind of a money-back guarantee. We're going to repeat the offer. So we're going to repeat what's included. Now that people have the price in mind, we're going to go through it again. We're also going to have instructions on how to buy. So I'm going to get into platforms here in a minute, but they're going to have to click something somewhere. So depending on what platform you're using, you're going to say, click the link in the chat or click the link at the bottom of your screen, whatever it is. And then you're going to have them walk through, here's what to do. So, click the link at the bottom of your screen or click the link in the chat. That's going to take you to a landing page that looks like this, and you're going to have a screenshot. And then you're going to fill in your name and your credit card info. You're going to click the Buy Now button, and you're going to get immediate access to whatever it is, right? So it doesn't have to be exactly that, but you are going to be giving them instructions on how they go from being in the webinar to buying to receiving it. So you want to have those instructions. So that takes a few minutes to go through. So then typically we're done around 55 minutes, and then we have a Q&A. So this was a 55-minute webinar. If people stayed the whole time, which when we run a webinar, most folks do. We have folks stay mostly till the end. So in fact, what happens to webinars, people are going to join a little bit late. And then some folks, so you kind of have this cascade of people joining and then a cascade of people leaving. And when we run webinars, most of the time, it's a pretty consistent number of folks throughout the entire webinar. So, if we've got 100 people, it might take about 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get up to the 100, and then it's going to stay there. So some folks will drop off and leave a little bit, but others are going to join and replace them. So that's a really high retention rate, though. Overall, having about a consistent number of folks present until the end, that's pretty powerful. So this thing works. We've also seen close rates around 25% with this. When we're selling something valuable, we've seen close rates around 25%. So this is a really great formula here. So anyway, 55 minutes in, we're done, except for the Q&A. Now, how long is the Q&A? Well, I like the Q&A to go as long as it needs to. So you can have a cutoff if you need to, but if people are still asking questions, I don't see a reason to end early. Go ahead and hang out, answer their questions, because they're asking questions because they're thinking about buying. So we do want to hang out and answer their questions. So with all of this in mind, that brings us to how long should a webinar be? Well, if we're following this formula, the bulk of the webinar is going to be 55 minutes followed by a Q&A. And so we could, say this is going to end up being, depending on how many questions you get, maybe an hour and a half total for the webinar. But the main content is done around an hour in. Now, part of that is because a lot of folks are busy. They're jumping in on their lunch break or something. And so if they're jumping in on their lunch break, well, we don't want it to go beyond that. They've got an hour for lunch. So we got to get through the main content within that hour. I've heard some of these folks who, are the hard salesman people saying to go even longer, and you want to go 2 hours because then, only the diehards have stuck around that long. I don't want to only be selling to diehards personally. So that's why I like this. I like respecting folks' time. So that answers the question of how long. Content should be about an hour, and then Q&A can go longer than that as well. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you hit the like button, you hit the subscribe button, and you turn on notifications. Turn on that little bell. Will notify you the next time that we have a podcast. This also makes it easier for other folks to find this content. So if you found it helpful, like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. All right, let's talk about the equipment that you're going to need to pull this off. The short answer is this. If you have a laptop, you're good to go. You plug in some headphones, and most headphones these days have a little microphone on it. That's really all you need. If you have a newer laptop, I've personally seen the best audio come off of MacBooks, but whatever you're using, I would test it. People need to be able to understand you. So when I'm running a webinar, I use this same microphone. The microphone that I'm using for this podcast is a Shure MV7. That's S-H-U-R-E, Shure MV7. Joe Rogan is using a Shure, but he uses the SM7B. The MV7 here, this is about a $250 microphone. It plugs directly into your laptop or your computer. You do not need any interfaces, right? If you're going this, I've listened to all sorts of microphone tests. You can find these on YouTube, where a YouTuber will go from mic to mic to mic, and you can hear which one you like most. I think, from my research and from listening to it myself, this microphone, the Shure MV7, is the best bang for your buck. There are microphones that sound better. So the Shure SM7B, that's what Joe Rogan uses. It sounds better than this one. It's also $400. And as I was evaluating, I was just kind of going back and forth on, is it worth $150 difference? Going from $250 to $400? I don't think so. And the SM7B, you also need, it has a microphone jack and XLR. You've got to have an adapter, a little box that you'll plug the XLR into, and then you'll go from there to your computer. So that adds extra cost. That's a couple $100 itself. So for half the cost of an SM7B setup, the MV7, the Shure MV7, will give you almost the same quality of audio. So if you're going to buy something, I like this microphone a lot, but you don't need this. You can get away with, your ear pods or whatever it is that you've got. Just test it, record something, play it back, and ask yourself, is this good enough? People will leave due to poor audio quality faster than they will leave due to poor video quality. So we do want to have pretty good audio going in. So maybe that's just your MacBook. If it's echoey in your office, there's sponge setups that you can get that'll absorb the audio so that you don't hear the echo, because that can get annoying. So really, I would take what you've got right now. I would start there. I would do a little test, record something in Zoom, listen to it, listen for an echo, listen for distortion. People really need to be able to understand you. That's the key here with a webinar. Now, for your camera, like I said, you're going to have your camera off for most of this. You're going to be sharing your screen. There's a lot of clarity there, right? Your camera doesn't really matter because you're only going to be on for the first couple minutes, and then again, you can turn your camera on during the Q&A. Great. Some folks will leave their camera on the whole time. Also acceptable, totally acceptable, but still, you're going to be sharing your screen, so your picture is going to be really small. So I wouldn't worry about a camera. If you are curious, for these podcasts, I use a Logitech Brio. It's a 4K webcam. I don't think there's a reason to get outrageously fancy. You can buy the thing with microphones and cameras and all these setups is you can go from, $10 for something to like $5,000. So a lot of the cameras that folks are using for like vlogging and stuff these days, they're like $2,000 cameras. The Logitech Brio is $200. And again, I'm asking, is the difference in quality worth the difference in price? We have never had anybody complain about our camera setup. prior to using this microphone, we did have some complaints for our YouTube videos. The camera that I had been using before just wasn't very high quality, or not the camera, the microphone wasn't very high quality. So again, if you are going to buy something, I would start by buying a decent microphone. For a webinar, I would not worry about what camera. Just use the webcam that's built into your laptop. That's going to be absolutely fine for a webinar. All right, with all this equipment in mind, what happens if we have a technical difficulty? Okay, let's talk through technical difficulties. What could happen in the middle of a webinar? What could go wrong? If you're using a webcam, it might stop working. So that's actually a reason to use the camera built into your laptop. If you're using a microphone, it might stop working. So it might be worth having a backup just in case. But that might just be your headphones, having the being able to select, because in Zoom and these other webinar tools, you can select which microphone you're using. Are you using the built-in microphone in your laptop? Are you using the built-in microphone in your headphones? Are you using an external microphone? So as long as you have a redundancy in place. So if I've got my Shure MV7 here, if this goes out, I can use the built-in microphone in my headphones. Great, right? So that's typically how I prepare for technical difficulties, is some kind of a redundancy, a backup. If your webcam goes out, it's a webinar. Don't worry about it. Keep your screen shared. You're good to go. Internet, I really like plugging in with an Ethernet cord. You can get an Ethernet to USB-C adapter, or I use a Mac Mini, and it has an Ethernet port on the back. If you're using a laptop, just get an Ethernet to USB-C, plug the USB-C in, you've got direct internet. That is going to be faster than your Wi-Fi, hands down. Basic rule of thumb, Ethernet's going to be a faster, better connection than your Wi-Fi. Now, if the Ethernet stops working, maybe your Wi-Fi will keep working. I've had that happen before, where the computer for some reason stopped recognizing the Ethernet. So have your Wi-Fi on too. Now you got a backup for internet. Now, if your router goes down, that's a problem you can't address, unfortunately. That just means you're out of the game, right? The webinar is done. If the power goes out, webinar is done, right? But there are some of these things that we can do to prepare for technical difficulties. All right, I've been alluding to platforms. There are a ton. If you go to Google and you type in webinar platform, or how do I run my webinar, you got a lot of options. So there's two ways you can go about choosing one. One is which platform offers the features that you're looking for. So you got to be able to do two things. One is run the presentation, and two is sell something. So if you do not have a lot of website expertise, you might want a webinar platform that has a button that builds out a landing page for you and that can take payment. So you might want something like Webinar Jam in that case. However, the other way of deciding which platform to use is going to be based on user experience. And there are a lot of web tools and apps out there these days. And what we have found is people don't want to learn a new one. They've already learned so many tools and apps, they don't want to learn a new one. So if you're not going to, the basic, that kind of leads us towards Zoom. Everybody's using Zoom. Zoom has a webinar capability, and a person joins in the same way that they join a Zoom meeting. So that, I think, should be the default. If you're thinking about running a webinar, the default option is Zoom because of how prolific it is. Everybody's used Zoom. But if you're going to use Zoom, you're going to have to post the link to the sale in the chat. And that link's going to have to go somewhere, like a landing page. You're going to have to accept payment somewhere. So Zoom, while I consider it to be the default, it does mean in order to sell something and take payment, you're going to have to build out a landing page or at least a page that can take payment. Now, you could do a payment page straight through Stripe. We're not going to get into that here. But that might be your solution. You have a link that goes straight to a Stripe checkout page. That could be fine. But that is something that you're going to have to tackle if you're going to use Zoom. But those are the two that I've seen used most often, Zoom and Webinar Jam. Webinar Jam, and if you're going to use anything else, you want it to load in a browser, any browser. It should not require downloading an app like GoToMeeting or something else. Like, I don't know anybody who's using GoToMeeting right now. You might, and there's no judgment or anything. I just would not choose to use something like GoToMeeting because chances are somebody will have to download that, and then they're going to be late and they're going to be frustrated. So I would either use Zoom or use a platform that will load directly in any browser, Google Chrome, Safari, whatever. That way your users do not have to download any other apps. So Webinar Jam, last I checked, they do load in browsers. So you're good to go there. All right, so now that we got the details hashed out, let's talk about how do we get people there? How do we get people there? Two main ways that I would suggest just to keep this simple. First, send an email to your email list. This is not something where you're going to be having 10% show up or something. It depends on how many people in your email list are engaged in the first place. I would anticipate just base level 1 to 2% of your email list showing up. If you go higher than that, you're doing great, right? Good job. But that's kind of the base that I would say 1 to 2% of active users in your email list should be anticipated. That's a pretty good starting place there. We have had higher than that for certain webinars, but it also depends on, like I said, how many are active, how often are you doing things like this. There's a lot of factors that are going to impact that. But as far as planning, I would plan for 1 to 2% of your email list. The other place that you can get signups, the other simple place is going to be through ads. Webinars are great for ads. You run, a Facebook ad, for example, that's going to show up on Instagram and Facebook for this free webinar. Swipe up to register. You got some details, pretty simple. Then once you figure out your conversion rate for that, you can just increase your budget and start filling it with more and more people. And that way you can pile people into the webinar. Now, with anything that involves ads or spending money, I'm always counting how much money we're making on this. And so that's going to be key here. You want to count not just how much did it cost per person who registered, but also how much did it cost for those sales. So if you get 30 people registered through ads and each one cost a few dollars to get registered, then you can look at how many people showed up, and then you can look at how many people bought, and you want the amount of money that you made to be greater than the amount of money that you spent. And then over time, you want to be increasing that ratio, increasing your return on investment. So at the beginning, just as your base level, average ROI for Google Ads, and I think Facebook's pretty similar, is 2 to 1. For every dollar you spend, you make 2. That's average. So I would anticipate that at the beginning as you're budgeting all of this stuff out. Then over time, you want to be improving your messaging. You want to be improving your call to action. You want to be improving your webinar script. And all of that will then improve your return on investment. So you do want to be pushing and seeing if you can raise that to a 4 to 1 and then a 6 to 1, And you're then, once you get to a decent ROI, you can basically print money. You turn up your budget for ads, which gets more people registered, which then sells more. So there is this cautious time at the beginning, because at the beginning you're learning a lot, you're figuring things out. And then as you figure it out, you can start increasing the budget and making sure you want to monitor those numbers, right? Because ads and stuff, it's easy to spend more than you make. You want to be cautious here. You want to be monitoring all the numbers. But over time, you can increase your return on investment in a really great way with webinars. All right, now that you've got people signed up, how do you make sure that they show up? How do you increase the turnout? So you've got this many people registered, and this is something else you want to be tracking with all of this. You've got X number of people registered. How do you maximize the number of people who actually show up for the webinar? The first and most basic thing is to send a reminder email 1 hour in advance. That is your starting place. Now, Zoom, this is not default. This is ridiculous to me. I don't know why it's not default. It absolutely should be. But a reminder email is not default for Zoom webinars. So you want to go in and make sure that you turn that thing on. Turn on the 1 hour before reminder email. Turn on the 1 day before reminder email. And then potentially you can experiment with like a 3 days in advance reminder email as well. Which gets at another thing that I haven't covered yet, which is how far in advance should we schedule this thing out? I have seen data online that 50% of people will sign up for a webinar that is at least a week out. 8 days, I think, is what the research showed. So you want to be planning these things a couple weeks in advance and letting your list know and running ads and letting people have time to sign up for this thing. Now, there are other folks who say people want to go to a webinar that starts in 20 minutes. That might be a possibility. Sure. Maybe they want one that starts tomorrow. I would experiment. Like I said, I've seen research that backs up scheduling a webinar at least 8 days in advance. But Stealth Seminar is another webinar program that you can use. And they have an automated webinar feature, which, to be frank, a lot of people consider this to be kind of cheating. So it's a pre-recorded webinar. It's got a fake chat. People who are viewers of the webinar who realize that it's fake, they feel cheated. So I'll be really careful about this. But Stealth Seminar, if it's an automated pre-recorded webinar, that means that they're able to start it whenever they want. And they have an option where whatever time a person is viewing the webinar or is viewing the sign-up page, they will display 3 options. One is for the top of the next hour. So if they're viewing it at 10:25, they would see that the next webinar starts at 11. And then I believe there's one that's like later that evening, and there's one that's the next day. And they say that they get a lot of registrants who actually show up by doing it that way. So that's a really short window. Now, if you're doing a live webinar, this is impossible. It's utterly impossible. And so I would personally go with the 8 days out option if you're doing it live. You could also do a recurring option where they get to pick. Do you want to go next week or the week after or the week after? And test and see, well, what gets that most show-ups? But if you're not doing that automated, it's really impossible to have people see something that's like at the next hour unless it just so happens that coincidentally it is the next hour. So increasing turnout, mostly going back to that what I was talking about a second ago, mostly what we're going after here is reminders. A reminder email an hour before is the basic place to start to increase how many people who registered actually show up. All right, so at the beginning of this episode, I said that there's 2 main points of webinar. One is to provide value, and the other thing is to sell. So how do we convert people from a viewer into a paying customer? Well, if we go back to the script, it's pretty clear. You got to sell something, number 1, and you have to have a clear call to action, number 2. Those are the main parts that are required to convert your viewers from just viewers to paying customer. You got to have a dang good offer and a very clear call to action. So you got to be selling something and then telling people to buy it, right? If you are not confidently selling, people aren't going to buy. And it's not about being a pushy salesperson. When you are confident in what you sell, your viewers are confident in buying it. So if you don't look confident, they're not going to buy. If you're like asking for them to support your company, you're basically asking for charity. People don't want, that's not why they want to give you their money. If they're going to give to charity, they're going to go give to something like Charity Water that's going to help kids in Africa. If you are selling something, then sell it with confidence, right? If you truly believe that what you're selling improves people's lives, you have no reason not to be confident. So put together a really good offer and then sell it with confidence with a clear call to action, clear click here to buy, actually have the link, right? Everything I shared in the script. Actually have the link, tell them what's going to happen when they click the link and how they can buy. So we want to drive all the way to the hoop here, right? If you are just kind of, if you feel like it, if you want, people are not going to buy. Confidence is the number one predictor of close rates. The confidence of the salesperson is the number one predictor of close rates. So if you are not a confident seller, I would recommend you have someone else on your team run these webinars, which is another reason to use a script. Like I said, if you've got a script, anybody can read the script. Now, not everybody is going to do a great job. Some folks don't, when they read, they kind of sound like a robot. But as long as you've got somebody who's, pretty good performer, who is confident in your product, who absolutely loves what it is that you do, you're good. They can read the script. They can drive to the hoop. They can finish with a strong, confident buy now. And that's how you're going to convert your viewers into paying customers. Now, the last question that we sometimes get is, should I charge for the webinar? You can. It depends on the purpose, though. If your purpose is to sell something else, maybe not, right? You could charge for the webinar and then also sell them. It depends on how much value you're going to be providing. It depends on your overall strategy. I've seen folks who do webinars with guests and they'll charge for that. And then they'll sell stuff in that webinar. So sometimes having guests makes it feel a little bit more like an event, right? Technically, it's still a webinar, but now it's an event. It's kind of like going to a conference that has all of these speakers. Maybe you'd charge for a webinar like that. But it depends, again, on the purpose. So if the purpose is to be both a lead generator and to get some sales, well, charging for the webinar might get less leads, but you're going to make money on the front of it. So I'm not telling you whether you should charge or not. What I'm saying is you can charge. You got to make sure that it's worth it. And then you'll have to decide, okay, if we're not offering it for free, where are our leads going to come from? Because that's kind of the point of having a free webinar, is you're going to generate a bunch of leads that you can then follow up with to sell the thing. So if you're going to charge for the webinar, where are the leads coming from prior to the webinar? So that's going to be a big question. So you also maybe want to wait to charge for the webinar until you have a solid flow of leads coming from somewhere other than the webinar. That might be a determinant for you of if and when you should charge. Something to consider. So this has been all you need to know, everything you need to know about a webinar. 10 ways to have an incredible webinar that makes a massive impact. The key here is the script. Everything that I talked about here is built into the script outline that I shared. So click the link below the episode to go to the show notes page and grab the webinar outline there. You can then use that to write your own incredible webinar. Like I said, this outline has gotten us a 25% close rate in webinars. Pretty incredible. If you have more thoughts on how to make an even better webinar, go ahead and post them below the YouTube video in a comment or send them to hello@clearbrand.com. I'm always looking to improve our own systems and processes and improve the way that we do webinars. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening to the Clear Brand Academy podcast, where we take the mystery out of marketing and help you get more leads and sales with a clear brand and proven marketing tactics. If you liked this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to outsource your marketing to our team, go to clearbrand.com.